flowers do we have today?
Ah, we've got Alstroemeria.
Alstroemeria.
Or Peruvian lilies. You can call them that too.
Peruvian lilies. I like that.
What session are we on?
63.
No, 62.
62. Okay.
Close. 62. Yes, we had some very interesting information. Oh, every session is interesting. But in the last few sessions, we've several times talked about HPB because she's the epitome of what a chela can accomplish in one lifetime. And obviously, she's an example for all the rest of the people who are interested in becoming chelas of the Mahatmas and learning directly from them at some point. She went through something that is referred to as encountering the dweller on the threshold. St. Moses did the same thing 18 months later. He failed, but HPB succeeded. She passed the test, and it was because of that that she was able to merge her consciousness with the Mahatmas, specifically with her own Mahatma Moria, to the point that they could operate through her. They could enter her body, use it to write, to communicate with Olcott or whoever happened to be in the room at the time. Olcott said that he noted numerous different personalities. He never said a number, but it could possibly have been as many as 10 or 12 personalities. He said there was only one that he called the philosopher, that didn't actually enter her body, but instead dictated to her. And she would write down everything he said. I don't know if Olcott could hear. It obviously wasn't a physical voice, but he could see that she was communicating with someone, and she could answer questions that Olcott posed. And they were coming from the philosopher, not from her.
This is the first time we've heard that she's been occupied by 10 to 12 of the masters.
Well, I'm guessing because he doesn't like to talk too much about specific ones. And at the time, he didn't really divulge any of the names, including KH and Moria. But later he divulged the personalities and his nicknames for them.
By he, you mean Olcott?
Olcott, yes. Because this was a study for him to see this phenomenon.
And it's also interesting that most of the time they were using her body as their own vehicle of expression. Mm-hmm. But in certain instances, like the philosopher.
Only one. He said that was the only one where she took dictation.
And we can just infer that the processes that go on the inner planes are very different. They're extremely different from anything that happens in the physical world. And we've had hints about how the vibrations work and such. And it's just interesting to see that. Like one of the masters dictated something was going on to cause that to be the most appropriate way of communication rather than occupying the body. It's just interesting, right? How it works.
And that was just his preference, obviously. And that's more common. Good mediums can take dictation from someone else. They very seldom actually take over the body like a trance medium.
But not in HPB's case, because she was very, very special, very different. That's very interesting.
So that was very different from what any of the mediums were doing. But I wanted to talk more about the dweller on the threshold. We did learn, and it is common knowledge, that the dweller is you. You are the dweller. Right. This is your evil nature. Right. So this cartoon of the devil sitting on one shoulder and an angel on the other is absolutely correct.
But should we give a little context, though? We assume that most people have heard of the concept of dweller on the threshold, but just a quick overview of what that is, or is that where you're going? Are you going to give that?
Well, no. You go ahead.
Well, we don't expect everyone to have watched all 61 prior videos and remembered everything. We've mentioned it a few times. It's an encounter that every soul, every person will eventually experience if you're on a spiritual path. And we can't dictate when or where or how it's going to happen. And it can happen multiple times. I don't know that we mentioned that.
It can happen over a long period of time in spurts, yes.
Okay. It's an encounter where we meet a very difficult challenge. We're being tested. And what would the threshold relate to? It would relate to an expansion, a progression. You could even call it an initiation of types, right? Not necessarily a first to second degree, but when you finish the process, there's a change that happens.
If you succeed.
Mm-hmm. And it's a very big challenge, spiritually, physically, sometimes, emotionally, mentally, all of it. And the dweller, it's almost like an entity awaiting your approach, kind of. And please correct me if I'm wrong, but the dweller is us. It's our nature that we need to basically do battle with.
Mm-hmm. It's the story of the Bhagavad Gita. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. And I assume that the reason that it is named the dweller is because he guards the temple of wisdom. And you can't enter unless you have subdued the dweller, which is yourself, your lower nature. And it's your higher nature that is the angel that is trying to give you help and guidance. And it's this battle between good and evil within yourself.
The threshold could be a physical doorway, like crossing the threshold from outside to inside the temple, or I somehow just picture it as like this chasm that's being crossed, like a threshold from everything normal or everything that we're used to something, crossing a chasm into a more elevated existence, kind of. That may not be visually accurate, but that's kind of how it seems. There's a chasm you can fall into if you don't succeed. It's just a visual that I feel when I think of it.
Yes, that's the science fiction version of it.
Tumbling headlong into an abyss.
Yes, and that's a metaphor that K.H. has used before, quoting Eliphas Slavey. He was talking about the aspirant who makes a certain amount of progress to where they will either go forward, or if they try to go back, they've gone far enough already that they will fall into an abyss because there is no going back.
And since I do like science fiction movies, I picture in the first Lord of the Rings movie when Gandalf is fighting the Balrog. If you know Lord of the Rings, you know what I'm talking about. But there's a bridge called the Bridge of Khazad-dûm. Pardon all the Middle-earth language from J.R.R. Tolkien. But when Gandalf, the wise wizard, is fighting this gigantic monster, this is kind of how I picture the dweller on the threshold. The bridge that he's on is above like lava and stuff, and the bridge starts to crumble. You can't go back because you'll fall into the lava. The forward is this demon, and of course, Gandalf does conquer the demon, and that is kind of an allegory. J.R.R. Tolkien was a little bit spiritual as well when he wrote the Lord of the Rings.
Yes, and it's sort of in the realm of myths and legends. And if they are based on someone's ideas who is somewhat advanced, even somewhat, they usually get some inspiration and they can convey some truths subliminally to everyone who watches if they're paying attention. We promised in our last session, because we talked about rounds and races, we promised that we would give a very quick review because it got a little bit bogged down in our discussion. So let's do that very quickly. This is a chart that covers several different layers, several different elements of the rounds and races scheme. Our world goes through 7 major, really major evolutions. The first one was at the very creation of our world. And that's when we were talking in our last session that these Dian Chohans come to set the stage. So that's where the myths of the Osirises and Jehovah's originated, the Brahmas, those who create the world, so to speak. That's where these myths come from, right from the very beginning. Now, at various stages, there are other Dian Chohans, not quite as elevated probably as those, but still Dian Chohans within the hierarchy who come periodically to raise us back up again, because Everything devolves when they're not on guard, so to speak. So the first round was simply setting up the stage and getting the basis of the mineral kingdom, or what will become the mineral kingdom, set up. And there are human beings right from the very beginning, because guess what? This is all a training exercise too. They're not going to go through all of this work and not be training other people. So those that have made a certain amount of advance on other worlds and are in training to become Dian Chohans themselves, they're going to be present during all of this. And they're going to watch the whole process and participate. They are participating. So first round was setting up everything. And this is still very vague and nebulous. You can't even really call it an earth. But then the second round is the beginning of the plant kingdom. And these same individuals who experienced viscerally being minerals now experience being plants again. We mentioned that it is a review process, just like the fetus within the womb goes through a recapitulation from the very beginning, mineral, plant, animal, then human.
I don't think we mentioned what the biggest circles are. So you're talking about the biggest circles. You wanted to give an overview of the general process. So this
right, but these are all stages. So one round, and in the early rounds, we don't even know what all of the different stages are. So there's not much we can say about them.
And when we say round, we mean a planet that is not physical and it's moving from A to B to C?
Yes, it goes all the way around and it goes through different permutations on each one. And it goes through the whole thing, but there's not much that anyone could describe to us today in 2025. So first round was setting up just the vague concept of minerals. And second was a little more dense, a little more concrete, setting up the plant kingdom, or what will become the plant kingdom. And again, these humans that are participating are experiencing all of this. And then the third one is the animal kingdom.
The humans are not in human form, though. They're in what form? I mean,
they're probably astral.
Okay.
And they're coming more and more dense as the world itself is, because you can't experience something when you're not able to enter that, be cribbed, cabined, and confined to the same point. It's all very difficult. Third round was setting up the animal kingdom, and now they are actually becoming physical. But they're also strange creatures, giants, and so they're not as physical as what we have today. And yet to these people and to the animals, it was completely real. Very strange animals that can't even be described, but some of them would be like part human and part animal, or parts of different animals that we would recognize today. So when you hear these myths and legends, they're not completely fantasy. They've been played with and changed a lot, but it still explains something that actually happens. Now, the fourth round is what we're in right now, the most dense. And this is the round of the human beings. And it lasts for millions upon millions of years. So in this round, we have, so let's talk about the fourth round. We have the different root races. Each planet represents a root race.
So now we're no longer on the largest circles, we're on the second largest we're talking about, the root races.
Right.
So the fourth round would not just be this circle here.
Right.
It would not. It would be an entire cycle.
Exactly. So the first root race was very vague, very etheric, can't even describe it really. It's so vague. Second root race, a little more dense, a little more able to be perceived, but still nothing like physical. Only in the third root race do we start getting the physical coming in, but still mostly astral at the beginning and then becoming denser and denser with each part of this third root race until it becomes completely dense as far as it could at that time. And that was the Lemurians. That was still in the beginning when they had giants, when they had cyclops, people with third eyes. And then those died out. And then later it became more and more the humans that we recognize today.
Shouldn't we be just focusing on this right here if we're talking about the fourth round?
This is the fourth round, the whole thing. So first root race of the fourth round. Second was more.
Okay, that's a little confusing because the D is the densest.
Right.
But D is making a whole round as well.
Well, this is the round of D.
Root races.
This is the root race. D is the root race.
Okay, so these smaller circles are the root races.
No, these are sub-races. So this would be the first subrace, second, third, fourth, fifth of the fourth root race. Atlantean root race, the fourth root race. Atlantean root race. And then we have the fifth root race, which is what we are in now. Fifth root race. We are this far along in the fourth round. So fourth round, the human round, fifth root race, which is the Aryan race, and we've had the first subrace, second, third, fourth, fifth subrace, which is the one that the Englishmen are. And then there will still be two more subraces after that.
And then what are the smallest circles?
Those are branchlets. It goes into many different levels. So, fourth round, the human round, we're in the fifth root race, the majority of people on Earth, or a large percentage, because there are still some fourth root race bodies. I looked up the population of the world 1 million years ago, and guess what scientists say? 1,300 people. 1,300 people 1 million years ago. The Mahatmas would disagree with that, I think, because that was the beginning of the first subrace of the fifth root race, which is the Indian subrace. And then the European Anglo-Saxon subrace is the fifth out of 7. And we still have 2 more to go. And even then, we still have 2 higher root races that, again, are going to be very ethereal in nature, because guess what? In our next round, we're going to be working on becoming adepts. Now, obviously, we have some people who are running way ahead of the rest of the crowd. But this is when the whole group of monads becomes more enlightened, and of that, a certain number will be graduating to adepts and will be in training for the entire next round. There will still be plenty of humans on Earth because they need subjects to work with, and that's human beings. If you're going to be an adept, it's all about working with human beings. And then the 6th round is about becoming a Buddha. And then the very last round is all about becoming a Dian Chohan, millions and millions and millions of years from now. So this is, again, just a brief outline of where we're at. And Do not get bogged down on details, please. Just get the general picture of what's going on. There'll be plenty of time. Now, I want to point out, too, that there's only one way that you can really learn this, and it isn't by studying. You might get some bits and pieces through meditation, but Olcott explained how you learn, because that's how he learned it. It's through a vision. And it would be like the most amazing PowerPoint production you've ever seen, because it's in 3D and it shows in graphic detail all of the traveling and the focus of energy and what is being worked on and what's going on in the background, because it's never just one location, but there is always one major focus. So it is extremely complicated, and that's the only way you can learn it, is when one of these adepts shows it to you. And so that's in the future for most of us. But a few people have seen it before, obviously, and many of the chelas, including HPB and others.
I'm picturing the most elaborate orrery. Most of us went to elementary school, had an orrery hanging in the classroom somewhere. I can picture how that would be like, even four-dimensional somehow, with not just the planets of our solar system, but the rounds and everything.
Well, when I went to school, we had a globe, and that was it. We were lucky to have that back in 1492 or whatever it was.
Christopher Columbus.
They didn't have globes because the Earth was flat, remember, in 1492. One thing I wanted to point out, in our Devachan discussion, we talked about what happens when a person dies before their time. And we discussed in some detail that those who die by suicide are in a real predicament, because they think that that's going to solve their problems, and it doesn't. It actually makes it far worse. There was a discussion on the Theosophy Reddit page recently about suicide, and it's always very difficult to try to interact with anyone like that, because they're extremely emotional and they don't want to hear what we're saying. But what I want to point out is that the Mahatmas don't avoid that sort of thing. They don't try to placate people and make them feel better about things that are simply difficult. They look at things as they are. They accept them as they are, and they don't make excuses. They don't try to make it prettier. They're perfectly content to see things exactly as they are, because they don't have the emotional reactions that we do. As long as we have a huge emotional component to our sense of being, we're going to have all kinds of cloudiness. And most of us prefer it that way, because we then can kind of live in this world of our own making. And it's a fantasy world, and we're fine with that. But we prefer to pretend that it's real. And most people somehow make this happen. But the problem is that it's extremely stressful, because subconsciously you know it's not real. You've maybe fooled yourself and other people into thinking that it's real, but it's not. And so you twist things around in your mind, and you try to convince others, and you associate with people who will confirm your own biases, and it's not helpful. You end up being stressed and unhappy and not making any real progress, because you're living in a pretend world. Only when you get out of that world, what did KH say? Come out of your world into ours, because they don't play those games. They look at things just the way they are, without all of this emotional filtering that goes on. And if you want to do that, it's painful to make that transition. But once you make that transition, you can relax because then everything makes sense. Everything is easy. And their life is easy except for humans, but they also don't stress about that. If they're dealing with a chela or a potential chela that is just all over the place, they keep them way out in the distance so that they won't be affected by that. And they give them whatever help they can, but they are extremely patient for eons, trying to help people who show promise, but maybe just don't want to make any progress yet. All right, let's get to work here. We are on a long list of questions, 29 questions that Sinnett wrote to KH. The last question was number 5, and he was asking about evil. And we learned a little bit about how evil really came to the fore and became more prominent during Atlantean times. And that toward the end of the Atlantean people, the fourth root race, and the Atlantean continent, it was extremely evil. What we learn is that every single root race will do the same thing. They will, towards the end, become more and more evil. And it's not that everyone becomes evil, it's that evil takes control. We're seeing it in the world right now as we speak. We used to have a lot more elevated people in the world, along with all of the evil. It's never not been evil, but the evil elements are taking control now, and they're trying to drag lots of people with them. We don't know how many of the 60 billion souls that are part of this process are going to be saved, so to speak. I have no idea how many that is. But I do know this. Every single individual has every possible chance to save themselves. No one can save you except you. And you'll have hundreds and even thousands of chances to turn around and go the right direction if you choose to. No one is going to be able to say, well, nobody told me. And that's why having to make the right choice in only one lifetime and then the rest of eternity depends on it makes no sense whatsoever. All right, question number 6, and he's referring to the last one. Closely allied to this question, the one about evil, would be another that people often ask. What is the good of the whole cyclic process if spirit only emerges pure and impersonal at the end of all things, as it was in the beginning before its descent into matter?
That's a good question.
Plus, of course, the portions taken away from the 5th principle. My own answer is that I am not at present engaged in making excuses, but in investigating the operations of nature. But perhaps you may have a better answer.
What emerges at the end of all things is not only, quote, pure and impersonal spirit, but the collective personal remembrances skimmed off every new 5th principle in the long series of being. Now, let's recap what the 5th principle is. Let's see, that would be higher mental, which is the level of the causal body or the soul. Everything below the 5th is considered lower nature, which is discarded after each incarnation.
It's the 5th principle that is most active in Devachan because that's all your higher nature, your unselfish, more spiritual nature.
And if, at the end of all things, say in some millions of millions years hence, spirit will have to rest in its pure, impersonal non-existence, that's the pralaya, as the one or the absolute. Still, there must be, quote, some good in the cyclic process, since every purified ego or monad or soul has the chance in the long interims between objective being upon the planets to exist as a Dhyan Chohan, every single one, from the lowest Devachani to the highest planetary, enjoying the fruits of its collective lives.
So we're given so many chances. At the end of each lifetime, we drop little by little all of our lower nature. And then when we go into Devachan, it's only the most pure part of our being. The highest principles plus that highest part of our personality that we developed in this and other lifetimes. And then we spent a long time in Devachan enjoying that pure bliss, absolute bliss. And much of our existence is spent in this very spiritual state to give us an idea of what it would be like to be entirely in that. And so we come back then into a new incarnation, pure in many ways, except for our karma. That's the only drawback. We pick up this suitcase full of karma when we come in, and we don't even open it for a few years. But here's this beautiful newborn babe that is just sweet and innocent, but with a great big bag sitting next to it.
Like a trust fund.
Yeah.
Waiting.
Ooh, whoa. Yeah. Whoa, I wasn't expecting that.
This is the first time I've heard the word Devachani. That's a regular person in Devachan.
Yes, exactly.
One thing on what you said, you mentioned we spend most of our existence in this spiritual, blissed out kind of state. It's interesting. We should meditate on that because this physical world, we think this is it. We think these bodies are it. And we spend most of our existence not in the physical world.
Yeah, according to the Mahatmas, we spend 10 times as much on the inner planes as we do. And it's actually probably more than that because we're not really on the earth when we're unconscious, when we're asleep.
And it's not only at night when you're sleeping, it's between incarnations, but we're also talking about the end of our monad cycle during the big rest. And then another,
yeah, so billions of years that we spend in our spiritual state. It should be easy, you would think, to gravitate back towards that. But it isn't. It isn't.
When he
easy.
uses the term the end of all things, do you think he means the end of our round?
No, in this, because he's talking about the one and the absolute, it would be the end of the entire universe. When the entire universe goes into pralaya, that's when nothing but the absolute is waiting.
And the chart that you showed us is only for our planet.
Yeah, that's only one planet.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's a planetary round. Then there's a solar round, and then there's a universal round.
Okay. But what is pure and impersonal spirit per se? Is it possible that you have not yet realized our meaning? Why such a spirit is a non-entity, a pure abstraction, an absolute blank to our senses, even to the most spiritual? Yeah, he's right. It's hard. You can't talk about it. It becomes something only in union with matter. It becomes something only in union with matter.
Only when it's connected with matter.
Hence, it is always something, since matter is infinite and indestructible and non-existent without spirit, which in matter is life.
Yeah, and he said that all along. You cannot separate spirit and matter because even during the pralaya of the universe, the absolute spirit is there. Matter is also there because it's in motion. It never stops.
But they're disconnected.
Yeah, only because spirit is sleeping. That is the night period for spirit.
That's interesting. So even when the universe dissolves, matter still exists because it's infinite and indestructible. It's hard to comprehend, though. If there's no universe, how is there any matter?
He described it one time as being like a mill that never ceases activity even when there is nothing to grind. And that's very interesting for me because it's like matter is just hanging out, waiting for spirit to wake up and animate it again.
Wow. Separated from matter, spirit becomes the absolute negation of life and being, whereas matter is inseparable from it. Ask those who make the objection whether they know anything of life and consciousness beyond what they now feel on Earth. That's a good question. Let's ask ourselves that.
Yeah.
If we know anything of life and consciousness beyond what we feel on Earth. That's what we aim to do in meditation every time.
And this is what he's trying to impress on these Englishmen, is that until you start working to switch your consciousness from this physical existence to something that is higher, nothing is going to happen. Until you take meditation and contemplation seriously, nothing's going to change in your life, really.
What conception can they have of the state of consciousness of one's individuality after it has separated itself from the gross earthly body, unless they are natural-born seers, or if they're learning to meditate and raise their consciousness? What is the good of the whole process of life on earth, you may ask them, if we are also good, pure, unconscious entities before birth, during sleep, and at the end of our career?
And I should have changed that to life because that doesn't make sense. At the end of our life is what he means.
Yeah. Isn't death, according to the teachings of science, followed by the same state of unconsciousness as the one before birth? That's interesting. Doesn't life, after it leaves our body, become as impersonal as it was before it animated the fetus? Wow, that's interesting too. The Christian faith would say that no, the soul is created when the fetus comes into existence. Life, the greatest problem within the ken of human conception, is a mystery, after all, that the greatest of your men of science will never solve. In order to be correctly understood, it has to be studied in the entire series of its manifestations. Otherwise, it can never be understood, even in its easiest form. Life as a state of being on this earth. It can never be grasped so long as it is studied separately and apart from universal life. This is profound. To solve the great problem, one has to become an occultist, to analyze and experience it personally in all its phases as life on earth, life beyond the limit of physical death, mineral, vegetable, animal, and spiritual life, life in conjunction with concrete matter, as well as life present in the imponderable atom.
This is very interesting. He points out here that in order to even begin to understand it, you've got to understand it in all of its manifestations. Life on earth, life as a mineral, life after this physical existence, life as a vegetable, an animal, and even as an atom. And that's why we have to go through all of these experiences. When I was a child, one of my favorite books was the book by Disney, The Sword and the Stone, which was made into a movie. And I'm sure some people have seen The Sword and the Stone, about Wart, the novice who is being trained by the wizard. And some of the experiences that he has to do is to become an animal. He became a fish, for example, experienced what it was like to live as a fish, also as a squirrel. And in each one, how to avoid danger and how to avoid being eaten by another animal. And then as a bird, one who could fly high and experience life in a different realm. So I thought, for whatever reason, when I was 10, 11 years old, I thought, this is really profound, but I didn't realize this is exactly why it was profound.
Let them try and analyze life apart from organism and what remains of it. simply a mode of motion, which, unless our doctrine of the all-pervading, infinite, omnipresent life is accepted, has to remain unsolved, even if it is accepted as a hypothesis, only a little more reasonable than their scientific hypotheses, which are all absurd.
As an occult scientist, he doesn't have a very high opinion of physical science.
Shall they object? Well, we will respond by using their own weapons. And he's talking about modern science, or people who aren't aware of anything other than their physical existence.
The inquirers.
Yes. We will say that it is and will remain forever demonstrated that, since motion is all-pervading and absolute rest is inconceivable, then under whatever form motion may appear, whether as light, heat, magnetism, chemical affinity, or electricity, all these can only be phases of one and the same universal, omnipotent force, a Proteus they bow to as the great unknown, as Herbert Spencer calls it, and we simply the one life, the one law, and the one element. Holy frickin' moly.
Yeah, so notice that he mentions how this one life may appear as light, heat, magnetism, chemical affinity, or electricity. These are the things that the occult scientists work with. This is what nature works with, and it's different forces in different manifestations at different levels. And science knows only one level, 1/7 of that.
Physical.
And that they don't know as well as the occult scientists do, because they don't have the instruments necessary to explore it as deeply as the occult scientists can.
Something to think about is, how would these forces appear to physical science, which we can kind of understand because we have physical science that works with these forces? But how can these forces appear in the etheric realm, in the realm of prana and energy? Will they exist there? How would they appear or work in the other realms, the other 6 of the 7 layers of reality? These forces operate, like Terry says. This is something to meditate on. Clearly, magnetism, you can't see it. I mean, you can feel it when you hold metal, but magnetism is less physical than your skin, for example. Chemical affinity, yeah. These things operate as do we on other planes, and that's how the masters occupy a body, for example. Connect telepathically with a chela, manifest a teacup in the dirt. Like, that's how it works, but we don't know the specifics of it. When we're ready to be given those instructions, then we'll know the specifics, but these are hints.
He mentioned Herbert Spencer and his concept of the great unknown. Herbert Spencer lived from 1820 to 1903. He was an English polymath and acted as a philosopher, psychologist, biologist, sociologist, and anthropologist. In those days, science wasn't quite as specialized as it is now. And it was not its infancy, but it was still relatively new. He is best known for something you may have heard of, the expression, survival of the fittest.
I think most of us have heard of that. I thought that was Darwin.
After he read Darwin's book, The Origin of Species, he wrote his own book based on his observations, and he was the one who came up with the term survival of the fittest. And then he expanded on that. He was actually agnostic, but he made it his goal to try to merge science and religion. Obviously, it didn't work too well, but several of the scientists of the day in England tried to do the same thing, try to make it more palatable to the ultra-religious people. So he had a concept called the unknowable, which he said was beyond human comprehension. It's a fundamental force or principle underlying the universe, and that we can't possibly understand it as humans. He called it the religion of the unknowable. The more that is learned about the universe through science, the more the remaining mysteries are realized. The more we know, the more we realize we don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah.
And he spoke about limitations of knowledge. Human knowledge is limited, dealing only with what can be perceived and understood through the senses and scientific methods. The unknowable represents all that which lies beyond relative knowledge. So that's why the Mahatmas paid attention to some of these scientists who left open the idea that we don't know everything.
The greatest, the most scientific minds on Earth have been keenly pressing forward toward a solution of the mystery, leaving no side path unexplored, no loose thread in this darkest of labyrinths for them, and all had to come to the same conclusion, that of the occultists, namely, that life in its concrete manifestations is the legitimate result of chemical affinity. As to life in its abstract sense, life pure and simple, well, they know no more of it today than they knew in the incipient stage of their Royal Society. They only know that organisms in certain solutions previously free from life will spring up spontaneously, Pasteur and his biblical piety notwithstanding. That's Louis Pasteur?
Yes. The Royal Society was founded in 1660.
What is that?
The Royal Society of Scientists.
Okay. They only know that organisms in certain solutions previously free from life will spring up spontaneously, Pasteur and his biblical piety notwithstanding, owing to certain chemical compositions of such substances. If I become entirely my own master, as I hope to in a few years, I may have the pleasure of demonstrating to you on your own writing table that life, as life, is not only transformable into other aspects of the all-pervading force, but that it can actually be infused into an artificial man.
Whoa.
What does that mean? Life can not only be transformable into other aspects of the all-pervading force, but they can actually be infused into an artificial man. So he's saying two crazy things there. You can transform a rat into a crow. Transform? Is that what he means by the first? You can take a cat and make him a dog?
I'm not sure, but it sounds like it.
And then you can actually infuse, so you can animate an inanimate object.
Well, Disney does it all the time.
Yes, they do. Yes, they do. Infused into an artificial man. I think I'm going to infuse this flower pot with life. It's going to grow legs and start walking around.
Sounds pretty weird, pretty woo-woo.
And that's the reason that we don't see it, is because the ones who can do this are wise enough to not play around. Obviously, this wouldn't be of any purpose. There clearly are reasons to do that.
The question is whether it is permanent or whether it's a temporary condition.
I wonder why a master would need to animate an inanimate object, if that's even what he's talking about. Is that what he's talking about?
Yeah.
I wonder what a reason might be for that. Like maybe the Titanic could have been animated to steer it away from that iceberg. But they didn't, clearly, because that was what was supposed to happen to the Titanic.
Exactly. No, but it demonstrates that they do have power.
Oh, clearly.
We can't even imagine.
And he wants to demonstrate, perhaps, maybe, but what would that be used? That is fascinating.
But he points out, too, that some of these things that he mentions that are possible today are actually going to be learned by individuals in the 6th and 7th rounds when they're in training to be themselves Jian Chohans.
Frankenstein is a myth only so far as he is the hero of a mystic tale. In nature, he is a possibility. And the physicists and physicians of the last sub-race of the 6th race will inoculate life and revive corpses as they now inoculate smallpox and often less pretty diseases.
Yeah. So in the sixth race, that will become a commonplace demonstration.
Inoculate means to give a vaccine to, doesn't it? Or to heal.
Yeah, but not necessarily just a vaccine. It can be introducing a foreign substance.
Okay. Revive corpses. Huh. As they now inoculate smallpox. Spirit, life, and matter are not natural principles existing independently of each other. That's what we've heard before, but are the effects of combinations produced by eternal motion in space. And they better learn it.
So, yeah, in the future, scientists will be much more like occult scientists.
I love that he's reiterating this whole teaching is so good. We're hearing a teaching we've heard before, stated in slightly different words, which is beautiful. Spirit, life, and matter are not natural principles existing independently. That concept is so important, but they are the effects of combinations produced by eternal motion. We've said it many times that spirit and matter are not distinct and different. Life and matter are not different. Matter is not devoid of life, and life is not devoid of matter. It's just different combinations and permutations and perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
You want something to meditate on? Meditate on that. What is matter? What is life?
This stuff is way more interesting than sports or all the drama that we get so wrapped up in on YouTube.
Come on, let's go to the F1 race.
Oh,
Isn't that more interesting?
Yeah, that's much more important. Drink some champagne, get wild. Yeah, that's a lot of fun.
Mm. Okay, that was question number 6.
Question 7. Are you ever permitted to answer any questions relating to matters of physical science? If so, here are some points that I would greatly like dealt with.
Most definitely, I'm permitted to do so, but then comes the most important point. How satisfactory will my answers appear even to you? That not every new law brought to light is regarded as adding a link to the chain of human knowledge is shown by the gracelessness with which every fact, unwelcome for any reasons to science, is received by its professors. Nevertheless, whenever I can answer you, I will try to do so, but hope you won't send it to the Journal of Sciences as a contribution from my pen.
All right, so question 8. Do magnetic conditions have anything to do with the precipitation of rain? Or is that due entirely to atmospheric currents at different temperatures encountering other currents of different humidities, the whole set of motions being established by pressures, expansions, etc., due in the first instance to solar energy? If magnetic conditions are involved, how do they operate and how could they be tested? Now, remember that every educated person in England and in Europe at the time and America and everywhere else was totally fascinated by everything that was coming up in science. It was moving so rapidly, and it was still in its infancy, even though it had been around for a few hundred years. It was really starting to take off in the 1800s. And so relatively intelligent people could keep up with all the latest advances, and they were memorizing and keeping up with a lot of the scientific principles that were being discovered and taught to students and to people in general.
So relating to the first part, do magnetic conditions have anything to do with rain? Most assuredly they do. Rain can be brought on in a small area of space, artificially, and without any claim to miracle or superhuman powers, though its secret is no property of mine that I should divulge it. I am now trying to obtain permission to do so. Well, that's cool. We know of no phenomenon in nature that is not connected with magnetism or electricity, since where there is motion, heat, friction, or light, magnetism and its alter ego, in our humble opinion, electricity, will always appear as either cause or effect, or rather both. That is so cool.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh. We know of no phenomenon in nature that is not connected with magnetism or electricity.
Mm-hmm.
Since where there is motion, heat, friction, or light, magnetism and its alter ego, electricity, will always appear as either the cause or effect, or rather both.
If we can comprehend the origin of its manifestation. So they're basically electrical engineers.
All the phenomena of earth currents, terrestrial magnetism, and atmospheric electricity are due to the fact that the earth is an electrified conductor whose potential is always changing, owing to its rotation and its annual orbital motion, the successive cooling and heating of the air, the formation of clouds and rain, storms and winds, etc. By directing the most powerful of electric batteries, the human frame, electrified by a certain process, you can stop rain on some given point by making, quote, a hole in the rain cloud, as the occultists term it. They have a term for it?
Mm-hmm.
By using other strongly magnetized implements within an insulated area, so to speak, rain can be produced artificially. Such is our knowledge, the fruits of millenniums of observation and experience. Wow, I like how he says, such is our knowledge based on just observing and being around.
Mm-hmm. And then he makes an interesting comment.
Okay. It has been several years since I had an opportunity to read the deductions of science on this subject. So unless I go to the trouble of catching up on it, I don't know the latest conclusions of science. But with us, it is an established fact that it is the Earth's magnetism that produces wind, storms, and rain. What science seems to know of it is only secondary symptoms always induced by that magnetism.
Yes. Yeah. We have some extra information here. This is, again, from the first volume of Olcott's book, Old Diary Leaves. And he's talking about when he and HPB were living in New York City, and she was teaching him different things. And the Mahatmas were teaching him different things through her. And he was receiving notes and letters almost daily in some instances from some of these Mahatmas. So he's going to tell us about an incident that occurred.
Mention has been made of one
Signor B, who was an Italian occultist. He had visited once before, and he and HB sometimes conversed in Italian.
An Italian artist possessed of occult powers who visited HPB in New York. I witnessed one autumn evening in 1875, just after the TS was formed, the extraordinary phenomenon of rain-making affected by him by, as he said, the control of spirits of the air.
Elementals.
Signor B, an artist. Do we know any more about this guy?
Only the two mentions in his book, but you'll see at the end he does say something to address that.
The moon was at the full, and not a cloud floated in the clear blue sky. It was an evening. I guess the sky is still...
Yeah, it was after dark.
He called HPB and myself out upon the balcony of her back drawing room, and, bidding me keep perfectly silent and cool, whatever might happen, he drew from the breast of his coat and held up towards the moon a pasteboard card, perhaps 6 by 10 inches in size, upon one face of which were painted in watercolors a number of squares, each containing a strange mathematical figure, but which he could not let me handle or examine. I stood close behind him and could feel his body stiffen as though it were responding to an intense concentration of will. Presently he pointed at the moon, and we saw dense black vapors like thunderclouds, or I should rather say like the tumbling mass of black smoke that streams away to leeward from the funnel of a moving steamer, pouring out of the shining eastern rim of the brilliant satellite. So the smoke is coming out of the side of the moon and floating.
Yeah, apparently.
And floating away towards the horizon. Involuntarily, I uttered an exclamation, but the sorcerer gripped my arm with a clutch of steel and motioned me to be silent. More and more rapidly, the black pall of cloud rushed out, and longer it stretched away toward the distance like a monstrous jetty plume. It spread into a fan shape, and soon other dark rain clouds appeared in the sky. Rapidly, the heavens became overcast. The moon disappeared from view, and a shower of raindrops drove us into the house. There was no thunder or lightning, no wind, just simply a smart shower produced within the space of a quarter hour by this man of mystery. When we came into the light of the chandelier, I saw that his face had that look of iron firmness and that clenching of the teeth that one sees on the faces of comrades in battle. And truly, for good reason, for he had just been battling against and conquering the unseen hosts of the elements, a thing that brings out every spark of virile force in a man, and truly for good reason. For he had just been battling against and conquering the unseen hosts of the elements, a thing that brings out every spark of virile force in a man. Signor B did not linger with us, but hastily took his leave, and, as the hour was late, I followed his example within the next few minutes. The pavement was wet with rain, the air damp and cool. My rooms were but a few steps off, and I had barely reached them and settled myself for a smoke when the bell rang, and, upon opening the front door, upon the threshold I found Signor B, pale and partly exhausted. He excused himself for troubling me, but asked for a glass of water. I made him enter, and after he had drunk the water and rested a while, he went to conversing about occult subjects, and kept it up for a long time. I found him ready to talk about art, literature, or science, but extremely reticent about occult science and his personal experience in psychical development. But now he gave me a bit of advice which fairly astonished me. I had seen him on the best of terms with HPB, talking in the most friendly and unreserved way about Italy, Garibaldi, Mazzini, the Carbonari, the Eastern and Western Adepts, etc., and matching phenomena like the trick of the white butterflies, and I certainly had reason to be amazed when, putting on an air of mystery, he warned me to break off my intimacy with her. He said she was a very wicked and dangerous woman, and would bring some terrible calamity upon me if I allowed myself to fall under her malign spell. This, he said, he was ordered by the great master whose name I had heard him pronounce to HPB to tell me. I looked at the man to see if I could detect the concealed meaning of this preposterous speech, and finally said, "Well, Signor, I know that the personage you mention exists. I am ready, even to the sacrifice of my life, to obey his behests. And now I demand that you give me a certain sign by which I shall know, positively, and without room for the least doubt, that Madame Blavatsky is the devil you depict, and that the master's will is that my acquaintance with her shall cease." The Italian hesitated, stammered out something incoherent, and turned the conversation. Wow. Though he could draw inky clouds out of the moon, he could not throw black doubt into my heart about my friend and guide through the maze of occult science. The next time I saw HPB, I told her about B's warning. She smiled, said I had nicely passed that little test, and wrote a note to Signor B to forget the way to her door, which he did.
And that's why they didn't ever mention him again. Yeah. The other incident he mentioned, the two white butterflies, was another time that he had visited HPB at her house where she was staying, and he was demonstrating what he could do. He opened the window and made some passes, and a white butterfly flew into the room and started fluttering around the room.
Wow.
And HPB smiled and she said, "I can do that."
Oh.
So she also went to the window and did the same sort of thing. And another white butterfly came in. And then the two of them kind of danced around together and flew around the room. And then they both disappeared. And she said that it was just an illusion. They were elementals, that they made appear as butterflies.
Wow.
So maybe that's what KH is describing previously here. Interesting stuff. So when he says, yes, you can create rain in a small area, now we know how they do it.
Do you think he was one of the Dark Brothers?
He's obviously not entirely white, and they do interact, remember, with the Brothers of the Shadow. They are brothers. They don't hate them. There is no hatred from their side.
When HPB sent him the note saying, forget the path to my door, the test wasn't designed by her or our teachers.
Well, it was Olcott's teachers. They were testing him to see if he was going to perceive what was going on here. He was being given false information.
I wonder what HPB was trying to do with Signor B. I wonder why they were hanging out.
May just be as a test. Remember that the Mahatmas use some of these Brothers of the Shadow to test their chelas. And that's what I'm assuming he was.
He might have other students, or he might be a teacher. I mean, not a white magic teacher. There might be some information.
Exactly. I'm sure he does. But that's why they stay in touch with them and leave the door open. They can always switch and go to the right side up to a certain point. Here's what I think is the key point. We know that some people at a given point have committed such atrocious crimes that there is no chance of them redeeming themselves. No amount of effort on their part would compensate for the harm that they've done.
In their whole journey of the soul.
And it could be in one lifetime. I'm thinking specifically about Hitler. He may, in one lifetime, and it was probably the culmination of many lifetimes doing the exact same thing. I don't doubt but what he was one of the black magicians in Atlantis. He may have crossed that threshold to where there was no chance for him to redeem himself. And I think is probably a very likely candidate for being one of those who goes to Avichi at the end of his life in 1945 and will not be reborn again and will live on the astral plane until the end of our planetary cycle for, as Damodar said, as much as 1,000,000 years. So it's an enormously long period of time that they spend on the astral plane being miserable. And that still isn't enough to compensate for all that they've done.
Earth's magnetic attraction of meteoric dust and the direct influence of the latter upon the sudden changes of temperature, especially in the matter of heat and cold, is not a settled question up to the present day, I believe. Since they accept the fact that the relative distribution and proportion of land and water on our globe may be due to the great accumulation of meteoric dust on it, snow being full of meteoric iron and magnetic particles, and deposits of the latter being found even at the bottom of seas and oceans, I wonder how science has not understood before now that every atmospheric change and disturbance is due to the combined magnetism of the two great masses between which our atmosphere is compressed.
And I had to read that several times to figure out what two great masses our atmosphere is compressed.
The magnetic field and the physical Earth itself.
He's talking about all of space, because our atmosphere is between all of space and our Earth.
But does space compress the atmosphere down? The magnetic.
He will explain.
I call this meteoric dust a mass. Oh, that's what he means. I need to keep reading before I start talking. I call this meteoric dust a mass, for it is really one. High above our Earth's surface, the air is imbued with, and space is filled with, magnetic or meteoric dust, which does not even belong to our solar system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Having discovered that, as they travel through space, our Earth and all the other planets receive a greater proportion of that dust matter on its northern than on its southern hemisphere. Weird. Okay. Since science knows that to this are due the larger number of the continents in the former hemisphere and the greater abundance of snow and moisture. Wow. Millions of such meteors and fine particles reach us yearly. All our temple knives are made of this heavenly iron, which reaches us without having undergone any change, the magnetism of the earth keeping them in cohesion. Gaseous matter is continually added to our atmosphere from the never-ceasing fall of strongly magnetic meteoric matter, and yet it seems with them to still be an open question whether magnetic conditions have anything to do with the precipitation of rain or not. I think science knows now that there's definitely magnetism going on with rain.
They do, but I don't think...
At that time they did.
And they didn't know to what extent. I don't keep up with what changes took place between 1882 and 2025.
I don't know of any, quote, set of motions established by pressures, expansions, etc. That's quoting Sinnett's question. Due in the first instance to solar energy. Science makes too much and too little at the same time of solar energy, and even of the sun itself.
Now he's going to make a kind of strange statement here.
The sun has nothing whatever to do with rain, and very little with heat.
What?
We all know that the heat the Earth receives by radiation from the sun is at the very most 1/3, if not less, of the amount received by her directly from the meteors.
Well, science totally disagrees with that.
So we receive heat from meteors?
That's what KH is saying. And it's statements like this that make a lot of theosophists who are also scientists question a lot of what has been said in the Mahatma Letters, because science today completely refutes that. But the problem is, we have all of the scientists today who are ready to defend physical science. We have none of the occult scientists who are willing to interact with us today openly to stand up for their point of view. If they could explain it to us, they probably would have a very valid explanation.
And chances are, this is something that modern science will discover in the future. Just like everything else is discovered later. The magnetism question we're talking about wasn't, widely known then. Now it's more widely known. The composition of atoms wasn't widely known then, what is now. And they predicted what was inside, or didn't predict. They explained what was inside of the atoms way before modern science did.
Yeah, at this point, science said the atom is the absolute basis of all matter anywhere in the universe. The atom is indivisible. There is nothing smaller than an atom. And the occult scientist is, no, that isn't true.
Isn't it in the secret doctrine?
Within a few years, they discovered, guess what? It isn't the absolute smallest particle.
And that could be the same with this. He's talking about how we receive heat, or maybe he's saying radiation from meteors.
They do know lots of things, obviously, that science can't explain, that I can't explain. And at some point in the future, there will be much more interaction. But right now, they don't dare come out, because there is so much evil in the world today that they would be trashed and pilloried. And they're not going to subject themselves to that. So they stay in the background. They observe everything. They keep up with science. KH said he didn't have time to read everything that science had discovered since some time in the past. But there are Mahatmas who specialize in everything. You can be assured that there are Mahatmas who know the latest developments in medicine, in science, in physics, in astronomy. They study and they keep up with what science is doing. But they know far more than that. They also do learn from scientists, I'm quite sure of that, but their knowledge goes way beyond what physical science can determine. Are we enlightened yet?
Very much so. Can't you tell?
Yeah, I'm with Spencer Herbert.
Survival of the
fittest, but he also said that the more we learn, the more we realize how much more we don't know. So, yeah, that's basically what our study is. The more we learn, the more we realize that there's so much more that we don't know. But religious people, they know everything. Cut and dry. God said it, I believe it, and that ends the discussion.
You know, his statement, survival of the fittest, is probably more profound than he even knows. Because even if a creature or an organism doesn't survive in the physical sense, there may be a very profound spiritual reason for the end of that life at that time. Read our starfish story in our book about how sometimes we think that it's important to prolong the physical life of everything because that's just normal. We want to live forever. But if someone's going to die, save them at all costs. That might not be always appropriate. It might be time for someone to pass on or a creature to pass on. And that might be the fitter, the more wise course for the person who's passing or the entity or creature who's passing and those around him, whether it's a person or an animal. So that statement's profound. Survival. Your soul is the fit survivor, even though the physical body might not survive. It's kind of interesting.
Yes, I've been watching quite a few videos on YouTube about 3 different prides of lion in Zambia, I believe it is. It's a channel called Love Nature. And they've had a multi-year project of watching these prides of lions, and they're stationed right on the banks of a river in the savanna. And the interactions and the fighting and talk about survival of the fittest, I didn't realize it. A lion cub's chance of survival to adulthood is only about 10 or 20%.
Even in the lion world.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's very hard to keep them alive until they are able to defend themselves.
I wonder if that's any higher or lower than like the gazelle that they eat.
That's hard to tell. Yeah, I'm not sure. The gazelle might actually have a better chance of survival just by sheer numbers. I don't know. But just the interactions and the fact that the people making the documentary get so invested in this emotionally and mentally, and yet they can't interfere with anything. They have to just watch nature take its course. And it's quite enlightening. But what I derive from that is we all went through that, various stages of the animal kingdom. And I can see in the way people operate, some of them are predators. Some of them are the sheep and the gazelles, the herd animals that just kind of follow whoever happens to be the leader. The lions have a leader too that they follow. So it's no different. We still have all of the different actors. And that's why there is such diversity in the animal kingdom, in the plant kingdom. We have to learn all of those things. If we're on our path to become, at some point, a force of nature as a Dhyan Chohan, we have to have experienced absolutely every aspect of our realm in which we operate. Yeah, fun stuff. We'll find some more fun stuff as we continue these questions in our next session, number 63. So thank you for following along, and we'll look forward to more excitement in the next session.
All right.